Is James Gunn's Superman a faithful return to the iconic comic book character? What would Aristotle think of this movie, and why is his input valuable? And what can we learn about the gospel from the story of Clark Kent? Welcome everyone to the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center, where we bring the best of Christian scholarship to the church to help equip the saints to engage with the culture. My name is Davis Green. I am the head producer for the Kirkwood Center. With me, of course, is the president of the Kirkwood Center, Anthony Costello. Anthony, we usually do this with our guests, but why don't you give a bit of your background for those who aren't familiar?
Yeah, so my name's Anthony Costello, as you said, and I've been doing Christian theology and apologetics for about 10 years. I got a couple degrees from Talbot School of Theology out here in Southern California, and started the Kirkwood Center about a little over 2 years ago with some colleagues from Talbot who are also interested and involved in Christian scholarship and apologetics. So, so it's good to be here. I'm glad you're on this one with us. Davis, usually on the
first official movie review.
Is that like on the other end of the camera? But like, what are you on the other end of in a podcast?
A lot of complicated technology.
You're on the other end of your computer screen, I guess.
That's right.
Usually, but
the internet cable. So on today's podcast, we're going to be discussing the new Superman film from director James Gunn. Just kind of housekeeping stuff. We'll discuss it sort of at a higher level as a piece of media, but also drill down into more of a theological kind of ethical analysis of the movie. I should say, Anthony, you've authored 2 posts about this movie that follow kind of the same structure, which we'll link in the show notes. I will say the first is a Patheos article titled James Gunn's Not So Super Superman. So sort of not so much bearing the lead on where we're going with this. And then also, I will say on that one, you detail kind of the aesthetic attributes of the film, successes and failures there. And then the second one is a Substack article titled James Gunn's Superman, Christus or Prometheus, which I love, and where you dive into the theological analysis. But any kind of general thoughts about those articles or that process, not necessarily about the movie itself?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, so I split it up into 2 fairly long articles. Well, it would have been a very long article if I had tried to combine them. The one, again, is up on Patheos, and the other is on the Kirkwood Center Substack for those who want to actually read through them. I had 2 concerns. One, relates to my current research for my book on neo-paganism. And that was some of the themes of the new Superman that have theological ramifications and that differ greatly from the original 1978. In fact, it kind of inverts a significant part of the 1978 Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve's Superman. And just to foreshadow that, when it turns Superman's actual parents, his divine parents, if you will, evil. And they're no longer sending Superman to Earth to help humanity, but they're actually sending him to rule over it. So that was one thing that sort of I noticed in the film that sort of related to the work I'm doing on paganism, which that's the Substack article, where I think there's been an inversion of the Superman mythos. The second one relates to a much more sort of an overarching concern with regards to aesthetics. And just this is not something that I am the only one who's been pointing out, but I watch a lot of like Andrew Klavan, for example, if you know Andrew Klavan's work, and I think he does a great job dissecting movies. And he's made this point as well, that aesthetically over the last, I don't know when you want to pinpoint it, but there's a general idea that aesthetically our aesthetic sensibilities have just degraded over time, right? Where we're pumping out bad art, but we've been pumping out bad art for so long that we no longer are in the position to say that it's bad anymore, So I wanted to also take a look at this problem of aesthetics, and that's the longer Patheos article. and just point out what I think is fairly obvious, that even if you like certain parts of this movie, if you think that there's some objectivity to art, that art is not just purely subjective, but that art can approximate to something like the beautiful, that, if we were to call a spade and do some actual analysis on the film, it's just a piece of bad art at the end of the day.
Sure.
And you can give reasons for why it's a piece of bad art. So I wanted to do both of those things.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Which is good kind of context. I did think of a couple things that would help us kind of lay the groundwork for talking about it, because so one thing in particular I wanted to ask you, just to kind of jump back to the high level stuff, is sort of what, treating this just as a movie before you sort of talk about it, from a theological perspective. For you personally, what is your kind of background with like superhero genre, and maybe with Superman in particular? Like, what are you bringing to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is where I can see people who are really into the superhero stuff and the comic book world, they might want to give a greater benefit of the doubt to any superhero film. I think we all do that. I mean, I think, and I'm a little controversial here. I'm not a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings movies, which I'm not saying they're as bad as Superman. I think they're decent, but they're not. But I don't think they're as great as people have made them out to be. And I think part of the reason why people think the movies are better than they are is, especially if you're Christian, is because you want them to be better than they are. And that's in part because the books, if you are a fan of the books, are actually great works of art. So you kind of a natural desire to want the movies to be as good as the books, which they're not, except in one regard, and we'll get to that later. And also, if you're a Christian, you kind of want the movies to be good because, I mean, there's a sense that, although they're not Narnia, that Lord of the Rings is still in some way a Christian trilogy, or has at least the right themes to make it a sort of Christian adjacent film. And I think we go, and I remember because I had read all the books when the first movie came out. What was it, 2000? I mean, it's been I remember going in there just really like wanting the movie to be great, and walking out and having this sense of like mild disappointment, but still sort of like forcing myself to like it more than I actually did.
Well, it's certainly true for the comics industry. I mean, just such a rich but very complicated history, because it's not one single property that we know is good. I mean, across Marvel and DC, at least as the primary examples, all of these universes have been reset several times. There's decades, or not necessarily decades, but several years that are famous in certain arcs for being really terrible. And so it's this weird, there are some people who really grew up on the comics that have a passion for certain stories or certain characters. And so it really just depends on who you talk to. But to your point, it's that what you bring to it, makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I'm not super into, I never really was. I mean, I had a stack of maybe Marvel comics, maybe about 20 or 30 as a kid, but I never really got into comic books that much. So I am coming in not as like a fanboy of comic books in general, let alone Marvel or DC in this case. I don't even know that I had any I was more of an X-Men. If I had anything, it was X-Men comic books. And I remember some of those being cool and the story arcs being good. So I don't know. Mainly my comparison was, but with the Gunn movie, was to the 1978 Richard Donner, Christopher Reeves, what I think is a good movie, objectively, like a good movie. It has good qualities. It meets several of, as we'll get into, Aristotle's criteria for aesthetic value. And I think when you compare the two, if you're trying to be objective, the original, the 1978, and even the sequel with the Three Criminals are much better films. Much better films.
Yeah. That kind of brings me to, I want to pull one thing you said just about the, kind of comic book superhero genre in general. Now this, again, just kind of helping us lay the groundwork for talking about specifics in the movie. One thing that I kept coming back to was just the value of that genre overall, and the way that we just understand the good and the bad that it can contribute, just as media. But in particular, you said high drama is not impossible to attain within the realm of the superhero genre. You've mentioned The Dawn of 1978 as an example, and here you also mentioned the Raimi Spider-Man, particularly number 2. I know 1 is obviously pretty beloved, and 3 is about as controversial as comic book movies get.
When there's reasons why 3 is not as good as 1 and 2, like there's obvious, there's reasons we can point out, but yeah.
But what do you think? But what would you say is kind of the sort of the value of that genre in general? Like what are we kind of doing with that you think is valuable, and maybe something that's not so good for us?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about as much. I mean, there is the standard idea that every culture needs mythologies, and we're maybe using the comic book genre as stories that give us sort of like maybe kind of archetypal knowledge of things that, we're not, or at least a bigger segment of the culture is no longer willing just to go straight to the prototype itself, the Bible. So now, obviously, a lot of comic books in the modern era are actual recreations of pagan myths. So you got like Thor, right, and others that are just drawing from the older Greek, Roman, maybe even Babylonian or Egyptian myths, recreating the characters, putting them in new modern context, and so on and so forth. So there's a sense of, think of like maybe somebody like Mircea Eliade, just the need for mythology and mythos in any given culture. We need these stories. They tell us something true about ourselves, about human nature. Again, you mentioned good and evil. So there's always a moral arc or component to them. And then, with somebody like Superman, and this is where I think the second article that I wrote on Christus or Prometheus, like Superman is one of these iconic characters that has been created that has sort of, that resonates in a sense in some of his attributes with a godlike figure, right? Because as I recall, I mean, he is almost invincible. There's kryptonite. We get it. Because, and I want to say I even read an article years ago saying like, kryptonite almost had to be introduced, because otherwise where would the tension ever come if Superman is literally invincible, right? There's got to be something that can threaten him. But I think this is what, I mean, one of my old professors at Talbot, Sean McDowell, who I did a little work 4 years ago, he's like all into the comic book genre, and he does tons of work on this. And he's probably got a lot more like showing parallels and how superhero genre, the superhero genre comic books sort of relate to even the Christian story. Now, I will say, just to put a sort of maybe a cap on this part of it, though, and this is something I've noticed, and this relates to the first article, the Patheos article on the aesthetics. I think we are also trying to look way too much into the superhero genre to always find some Christian theme or little thing that is worthy of our validation. There's almost this hysteria amongst Christians to try and find any little thing that might be Christian-like in a movie.
Yeah, or the opposite. They're looking for something that's a sign of cultural degradation in every piece of media.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, at the same time. Yeah, that's a good observation. I think I definitely see a lot of that.
You get all these articles by apologists. This movie is so Christian, and and you watch them and like, no, it's not. I mean, it's not even close. But you want it so badly to have some kind of Christian arc
Yeah,
or
yeah,
themes or character angles, and like it just really doesn't,
yeah, yeah.
So
No, that's a good point. Well, let's jump in then. So
yeah,
first, kind of talking about it was the Patheos article about the aesthetics. Yes,
yeah,
and make sure I don't
yeah,
mix those up. So there's a couple kind of specifics I want to throw at you to kind of help walk people through what you wrote in the article. But first things first, I mean, all of your observations here are kind of built on, Aristotle's criteria for um, drama. If you want to walk through kind of what that is and why that's important first.
yeah. And I don't want to present myself as some kind of Aristotle scholar, but a while back, one of the books I was reading through, this is a classic history of philosophy, Friedrich Copleston's History of Philosophy, 11 volumes, and I was going through Aristotle's Aesthetics. And we would categorize this movie as a tragedy, even though it's got tragedy. You got to understand is for Aristotle, it's basically a movie that is pointing to serious issues, of which this movie clearly is. It's got moral issues, and all kinds of things that would just fall under of serious film, or dealing with serious topics. Tragedy can have jokes in it. It can have comic elements. This movie's not comedy. It's not farce or satire. So we would categorize it as a tragedy in the classical sense. And, it's got a moral point that it's trying to make as well, right? That's very clear. So when looking at tragedy, Aristotle's got these 6 criteria to evaluate any tragedy or drama, if you want to use that term, to evaluate it by. The 2 most important ones, and the ones where I think this movie just obviously fails, are plot and character. Plot is the action. It's the storyline. It's what happens to the characters. It's what they have to go through, what they have to deal with, the events and the circumstances that they're placed in, right? And then that relates to character. You can see how the characters interact with the events, the circumstances, the conditions that they're under, and how they act and react, right? So plot and character are first and foremost. They're primary. The other 2 that relate to each other are diction. That's the actual script. That in this case, it's actual words that are spoken, and thought, which is a little bit more like what the words and maybe even the nonverbal acting, what it communicates. What is the overall message that is being communicated? The thought life of the work of art. It could be, again, communicated directly through the diction, through the actual words of the script, or through more subtle means, the acting of the actors, the facial expressions, the nonverbal stuff that still communicates maybe something of the inner life of the character, the thought life of the character, which then contributes to the overall message, right? And then the last 2 things are the least important, but those are melody or the music, right? And spectacle. Of those 2, the music is more important. As we know with soundtracks, soundtracks are powerful, can have a powerful effect on the emotions and what is the ultimate goal of any tragedy, catharsis, right? To have this experience of either fear or pity that sort of comes out in the movie. But the least important of these is spectacle. And spectacle in ancient Greek plays, stagecraft would have been like the pulley systems that maybe they use for somebody to levitate up in the air, which does come is actually the end of the Superman movie. When they float up in the air.
That's right.
So it is in there, and maybe the backdrops and the painted scenery. For us today, it would be special effects. It would be all the technical devices that are used to make the images of the movie, this huge monster that, just in the middle of the movie pops up, and, that's all that special effects, and the cinematography, the putting together of the angles and the scenes so that all the images and everything fit together. That would be the spectacle of the movie. But for Aristotle, this is like an add-on. Like, it's good if you have it, and it's good if it's a good spectacle, but it's subservient to all the other criteria, especially plot and character.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is helpful, and I think it's a good practical example of what you're describing before, where we're looking for something of value where it may not be, and we're limiting ourselves in the way that we kind of analyze, the stuff that's out there, the media that we consume.
And this is something that's not this overuse or this emphasis or reliance, maybe even on spectacle. That's not unique to James Gunn. That's
No, not at
just
all.
sort of the movie making waters
Sure.
that we're swimming in.
Yeah.
Every movie's got to be over the top with special
Yeah.
effects and characters and imagery and all kinds of weird and new and novel things that just pop up. It's like, especially and it suits the superhero genre. I mean, you go back again, you compare this one to the 1978 film. The 1978 film, it's mainly acting. It's got a couple special effects when, like, he flies up into space, reroutes one of the missiles in space, but the special effects are pretty basic, pretty simple. You got what Krypton looks like at the beginning of the movie, fine, and you got the ice headquarters, so it's in there and it's cool, but it's just to supplement what's going on with the plot and the character development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's dive into some specifics then, because obviously what you've sort of outlined already is that there's kind of an inversion there where we've sort of traded plot and character being primary for spectacle being primary, and I should say melody as well, since that's a pretty iconic theme, of course. But
plot, character, and script, and diction,
yes,
and acting,
yeah,
and the quality of the acting.
Yeah, so at least in the article you wrote, one of the primary ones that you touch on is character. So just to jump to kind of specific ones here to kind of help lay out what we're talking about. Let's talk Superman specifically. So I wanted to note a few things that you explained in the article as sort of examples for why there might be so much lacking in that character. And one of the primary issues being that there's not enough contrast between Clark Kent and Superman, at least according to the kind of traditional structure there. If you wanted to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, and and I would say that there just is no contrast. Like, Superman just is Clark Kent, and Clark Kent just is Superman. I don't think Corrin Sweet even had to act any differently. I mean, it's just so the character is utterly simple and simplistic. The only difference is the glasses and that street clothes versus the power suit, or whatever you want to call it. It's not a power suit because Superman's powers are innate, but that's the difference. His character is the same. He acts the same. He doesn't act any differently as Clark Kent. So it's not as interesting, not nearly as interesting a character as Christopher Reeves's character, where he tries to make Clark Kent different. And the way they wrote Clark Kent in the movie, and I think that is in the comic books, I'm not sure, I wouldn't know, but the way Clark Kent is written as a human character in the movie, he's got real struggles as Clark Kent, qua Clark Kent, because Superman acts like a social pariah and basically a nerd in the context of the 1970s. He's a nerd. In those days, being nerdy was you were an outsider, which makes it a much more interesting and complex character, because as Clark Kent, he's treated badly. There's this great scene in high school when he's in high school, and all the other high school football players. I mean, he could beat the kids on the football field easy, right? There's a scene where he kicks the ball and it goes 1,000 miles into the air, but he's getting picked on. He's getting picked on by the high school football players, which develops the character, right? I mean, so you got a script that allows for a complex character that just doesn't. That's not. things like that just aren't in the Corn Suite. And I'm not blaming Dave Corn Suite or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it's just a lack of script and direction.
Sure.
That he's got to work with.
I love that idea of, losing that like core value of the nerd in this. I think that's a great way to kind of demonstrate it. And
because it contrasts with his power, right? It contrasts.
Yes. Yeah.
He's weak as a man. Now, and this is sort of leading into the second article. As a man, he's kenotic. He's emptied of his power. But when he's got the suit on, when he's acting qua Superman, he can do anything, right? So it's
well, we saw very little of it anyway. That was what struck me about watching it. It wasn't even just that they were not different. It was that we really don't see much Clark Kent at all, and the bit that we do is, you don't.
It's negligible. You could leave it out. It doesn't add anything to the story to have him as Clark Kent. Nothing.
In fact, most his time spent as Clark Kent is spent talking about Superman. Most of his time as Clark Kent or is with Lois Lane, kind of as Superman, which is another, So there's definitely not much time spent on that.
Well, I think too, and I have to go back and watch. And I only watched this one once because it was so bad. So I was going off of memory, but I have this. I've watched the original. And I'm not a huge fan of the original. I just think it's a good movie. I've showed it to my kids. Mm-hmm. But there's this real tension when something bad is about to happen, and he's there as Clark Kent, and then he makes the transition, like he goes into the phone booth. Like there's a tension, and then there's a relief. You don't get that with this one.
Yeah, that's it. That definitely stood out to me. That seems like a victim of pacing, and I've heard others say that there's just too much packed into it for some in general. So pacing and all the ideas you kind of want to pack in at the expense of any real time spent, developing characters and kind of establishing tension, like you said. So one other example, obviously, being Lois Lane. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. You had mentioned just kind of the relational shallowness and sort of the fact that there's no real direct like implications for the complexities of dating like Superman. Which is half the fun of exploring the comic book genre in general, is how do you reconcile having superpowers with like mundane daily life, right? And you kind of miss out on that a lot. But you also had you had some general notes on her on the relational side. I will say, again, feeling like there was just very, very little to pull from. I think once she says after an argument, like, I told you that I'm not good at relationships. Like a lot of that kind of, tell, don't tell, not showing, when show, don't tell is the advice that you would be given to do it well.
Right. I mean, that's the lack of the criteria of thought. Every character in this film has to say exactly, it's almost like one of these bad Christian films. We have to say exactly, what we're thinking, because we're not going to act in such a way where you might come to the realization that maybe Lois has trouble with relationships. No, I'm just going to say, this is always why I have trouble with relationships. And again, the reason she has trouble with the relationship with Clark has nothing to do with him being Superman. As far as I could tell.
Yeah. No, and again, just a problem of it. This is, I would say this just as a general observation. It's hard to like extrapolate all this because there's not much to pull from anyway. The same is true on the theological side, where there's a lot you could say about some of like the things that are indicated, but it's not like there's any statement being made about relationships or statement being made about the Clark Kent Superman thing. It's just, and I have some thoughts about why that might be the case, but
I mean, my sense was that the reasons that Lois would have for or be concerned about for the relationship not working out were just the same kind of things that any postmodern 21st century Western educated, highly mobile girl, it would have, like, oh, my job might get in the way. I don't know if we'll work out in the bedroom. It's like, okay, like, there's nothing interesting about that.
There's almost not even that direct. I think one other character says, hey, didn't you say that things were complicated with that guy or whatever? Like, it's so flat and matter of fact and like minimal. But let's jump into Lex Luthor, because there's a couple kind of interesting pieces of that, because I do think that your kind of explanation of this pure evil is important. And there's one kind of thought that I had there that I want to ask after, but let me read what you wrote about kind of comparing Holt's Lex Luthor with Hackman's. You said Holt's Luthor is, in this sense, is quite unlike Hackman's original. Hackman's Luthor is not only winsome, but is the type of bad guy one inevitably finds oneself rooting for, precisely because he is so clever, genuinely funny, and temptingly human. And I'm intrigued by that because, there's some division, at least within Christian circles, about whether, like, the anti-hero, the moral gray internally for a character, whether that's good. I mean, I've had people tell me that they take issue with there being an anti-hero or without there being a clear, like, good and evil. Now, I agree with you. I find that kind of characterization a lot more intriguing, certainly more than this one. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. So with now to what was the actor's name? Nicholas Hoult.
Yes.
To his credit, he's not going to be Gene Hackman. I mean, very few actors are going to reach that level of talent and skill. I mean, maybe, but I don't know. But again, I think there's still a problem here of script and direction. There's all of these characters, Lois as well. They're all flat. They're all flat characters. There's no significant change in any of them. Superman is just the purely good schoolboy character. Lois is just the sassy gal from basically Friends or Seinfeld, just rehashed. And Luthor is just, the thing is with Luthor, okay, you can have flat characters. You can have just an evil character. That's fine. But it's just, so I'm not saying that we would expect a change in Lex Luthor. We don't get that in Superman 1 or the two Christopher Reeves Superman movies. Luthor stays a scoundrel to the end. I think there was a third. I never saw it. He stays a scoundrel to the end. But it's subtle. It draws you in because the scoundrel is not just like so obviously evil, where he's just a raging lunatic in every scene and he's screaming it at you so that, here's the guy you're supposed to hate, by the way. Here's the bad guy, everyone. Look, he's screaming, he's yelling, he's trying to kill everybody in Superman. We don't know why, but, I just want to make that really, really clear. Like with Hackman's version and Donner's version, you get this guy, he's generally funny. Sometimes you're actually rooting for him because he's so funny. And I think the other thing is because he is authentically clever. He has technical skills, but he's not just a master of technology like a lot of the characters are these days. Like, he outwits Superman. He outwits him. It's more like, I say this wasn't a great movie, but remember that movie with Bruce? It was a M. Night Shyamalan movie. It was based on a comic book, I think, where there's Mr. Glass, and then there's the Bruce played by Samuel L. Jackson, and Bruce Willis is unstoppable. Like Bruce Willis realizes like he has superhuman strength, but he gets outwitted. He gets outwitted by Mr. Glass, who's physically feeble, right? It's more like that. Like, that's a far more interesting kind of criminal mastermind, where he has to come up with something other than, I mean, basically what you get in this Nicholas Hoult character is just again, the very obvious raging lunatic, always angry. The rage is worn on the sleeve. There's never any doubt that he is not the guy we're supposed to hate. And, there's nothing attractive about him at all. And he just offsets Superman's power with technological power. He's not witty.
Yeah.
He's not clever. He doesn't outsmart Superman. He's just got tech. He's got tech.
And it's another one where we're sort of just told that that's the case. And a lot of the way that his sort of genius is demonstrated is in these sort of contrived, like convenient plot devices, which again, I would not say that this movie is particularly bad with these. I think one of the things that stand out to me the most, if there's a movie I watch that I don't like, it's because there's like, they're giving you the solution to the problem before the characters find the solution. And that's just not satisfying. Like I think in this movie in particular, it was hard to feel like there were any real stakes for anyone, or that anyone was in, like, in particular, and spoilers for Superman, by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen it. In particular, the whole kind of prison sequence, right? So he puts Superman in the cage, and I like that as an idea. He's gained the trust of the American government. He's the one they're outsourcing his imprisonment to Lex Luthor. It's an interesting idea. I like that. He's put in the prison cell. He finds blanking on the name of the guy that can change himself into any element.
I just called him Elemental Man or something, because he can change into any element in the universe or something, whatever. Okay.
So he does that because he can't get his hands on actual kryptonite. Puts him in and he says like, oh, this person he's been enlisted to help do this to keep you in prison. And then immediately we see that across the hallway, across the interdimensional hallway, that guy's baby is being held. So I'm like, oh, okay. So now we know that Clark's going to convince him to let him help him rescue the baby. And then to take it even further, they extend Luthor's evil beyond what he had even demonstrated before and have him, gun down a civilian that Superman knows, who they previously cataloged. There was a part where they were keeping track of anybody that Superman talked to twice, basically, so they could use them as leverage. They bring that guy in. They basically say, like, they're trying to get information out of him.
Oh, the hot dog vendor
sitting in the chair. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So that alone is like, and then immediately our elemental man is bawling his eyes out and ready to snap. It's like, well, there were no stakes here to begin with. And and at the risk of sounding nitpicky, I mean, we've seen that done well in so many movies where, I've been surprised by main characters finding solutions in movies before. It doesn't seem like there's any need for it to be so contrived where all of the how this is going to play out has already been laid out ahead of time. And maybe that's just an issue of being tropey. Like it's,
well, I don't know. Like I said in there, and I think what you're getting at is I just felt there was no tension in the film. I knew I mean, even again, back to the Lois and him storming out of the apartment in the first scene. I think it was the first scene we see them together as boyfriend, girlfriend. It's like, we know it's not like in Spider-Man 2 where it's like MJ and Peter, they may really not get together. And there's good reasons. There's good reasons why they may not get together. And you want them to be together. In this, you're like, A, I didn't care if they were together or not because the characters were uninteresting. They hadn't built them up enough to make them interesting. And B, it was just like, we know that they're getting back together. It's like, there's no real threat. There's no time
taken to establish that. Yeah.
I want to make one more point about the kryptonite. So this is another thing maybe I'm noticing in more and more storytelling. We're removing our storytelling more and more from the real world. So if you look up how Lex Luthor gets his hand on kryptonite in the original movie, they show him in his underground lair in this massive library. And he finds I can't remember exactly how it works out, but he's looking through a book where there was a meteor that hit in Africa, in Addis Ababa, which becomes sort of a running joke. And they go and they get this piece of kryptonite, and they show like an African guy holding this kryptonite in the picture and everything. it's a much more like, hey, this is sort of like something that is interacting with the real world that we live in. There is an Addis Ababa. There are Africans who, meteorites hit the, here it's like an interdimensional universe, pocket universe that Lex somehow creates. And then he gets somehow, we know not where, he finds Elemental Man. And
that guy, yeah.
that it's just like,
yeah,
this just is no longer connected to the world I live in anymore at all.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a critical flaw with a lot of properties like that is, we all love, for me personally, I mean, for the first kind of arc of the MCU, I mean, I was as bought in as you could get. But what I loved about those movies is that they did it. One, they did a good job of taking the time to develop those characters. It was a long road to changing the way that those stories went. But they also did a good job of kind of grounding it in reality for a lot of them. Now, you do lose out, and certainly in those kind of famous comic book runs that are kind of known for being on the weaker side, or all the times that they've maybe reset the universe. I mean, it seems like that genre is always running up against that issue of, we've made this so spectacular that we've now made it trivial, where we have a character that exists to solve each and every problem you could come up with. And it's easy enough in this one to just say, we brought this guy, we brought him here and he can make kryptonite. That's it. And now you could say, like, I do appreciate, certainly compared to something like Man of Steel, the willingness for it to be fun, to be colorful, to involve a lot of different characters, for people to just be weird. Nathan Fillion, who I love in everything, just him as the Green Lantern, but like the dumb one. He's not the really well thought out, self-serious Green Lantern. He's kind of a dud.
That's comic relief, and that's fine. You can have a character in there that's comic relief.
Yeah.
And that's all that the Justice Gang, because that was one of the jokes. That's all. I mean, the one character that I think had potential was Mr. Terrific. So the Green Lantern and Hawk Lady, I thought, those are just comic relief characters. And yeah, I mean, you can have those in there. I mean, I think the problem is it's just they're almost in too many scenes. I mean, there are scenes that they are in that it's pointless having them in there. The only reason to have them in there is, again, for the spectacle. I mean, there's this scene, and there's this scene that could have been good, where Lois and Clark are trying to have a heart-to-heart. I think it's the one where she says, "Oh, you see the beautiful in everybody," and he's like, "Oh, maybe that's the real punk rock," or whatever. And in the background, like, they're sitting in front of a big window, and the Justice Gang is out there fighting this huge alien being, and it's going, and like, if anything, it detracts from the one scene that might have been good. It's just, it adds nothing to the story. It's only there because it seems to me like contemporary directors, especially if they're doing superhero movies, have to just throw image after image after image at us because and this gets into our later point about Kierkegaard, because they're worried we'll get bored. And we just got to avoid boredom at all costs. I mean, that was such a dumb thing to put in the movie. It was just totally dumb.
Something that could be a productive kind of conversation. And again, a very short one at that, to come back to the point that we're making. So key point there, obviously high level, just a major lack of that kind of pathos overall in exchange for, which I will say, as you mentioned, on the kind of, a lot of the dialogue being kind of surface level and kitschy, and these days actually a pretty common complaint, certainly with newer Marvel properties, is they'll describe them now as quippy in the negative sense, and I think you use that word as well. Where
it's the dialogue problem.
Like, you can hear the jokes coming, like you know what they're going to say next, because
everything's a joke in that sense.
I liked you said, I wrote this one down because I just thought it was great. When it comes to character, sass suffices in Gunn's artistic oeuvre, which is a great way to kind of cap that off. And again, the scene in the apartment
between Lois and Clark, it's all just this. Nobody talks like it's all this fast paced back and forth, being clever and sassy, and it's like it's okay. There's no depth there. Compare that to some of the scenes between Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire in the Spider-Man movies that are very different. Or between Lois, what was that? I can't remember the actress right now. I'm blanking, but Christopher Reeves and Margot Kidder, I think, in the original Superman. I mean, there's better dialogue. It's just better dialogue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's actually, it puts my mind, it's almost like, we have to have dialogue in the movie, but it's almost like they're trying to squeeze spectacle into character now, where it's more about the style of the conversation than it is about like the substance, right?
I mean, if you're going to get that 1.5-minute long sequence where they're flowing through the Ion River in the Pocket Universe, and it's just stuff, and he's grabbing if you're going to get that in there, you got to cut 1.5 minutes of dialogue that you could have had, but that's just where we're at. And that's the overarching point is like, this is a degradation in our aesthetic sensibilities. We're giving ourselves over to what I think Kierkegaard might have called the fantastic. The more fantastic, the better, and we lose substance.
Well, let's talk a little bit then just about the the spectacle itself. I'll just read another quote here from your article. To kick that off, Gunn, like so many others, continues the awful trend of conflating the two most important criteria of art, plot and character, with the least important spectacle, as we mentioned before. They direct as if to say that the spectacle alone should be sufficient to generate the pathos. That's actually the point we were just making, was completely swapping those out. To generate the pathos needed for that cathartic experience. On the spectacle, and again, you kind of made this point already, but just it is sort of the temptation of, people making material for this genre in particular is to lean super heavily on that. But then also, I've heard the joke that like, if you can't remember the ending of a certain comic book property or whatever, chances are it ended with a big battle with lasers in the sky, rather than, an important conversation or some kind of character development.
So and it's not like you can have both, but it is. Here's another movie comparison. It is the difference between the original Star Wars, which is Episode 4, A New Hope, and the first prequel, which was the one where Anakin Skywalker is a kid, and I don't even know what it's called. So it had been episode one, where, I mean, you have certainly more spectacle in the second set of films, more characters, more blasts, more whatever. But look, it's the difference between, as far as pathos is concerned, it's the difference between what happens when Obi-Wan Kenobi gets killed at the end of the original movie, and how you feel when that happens, and how Mark Hamill reacts to it, as opposed to when, what is it, Kim Jong-il or whatever, Qui-Gon Ung, who is the guy that Liam Neeson played? Yeah, the guy that Liam Neeson plays gets killed by Darth Maul, where you're like, and he gets split in half and thrown down, and you're like, okay, whatever. It's just like this is like, I don't think I'm the only, this can't be purely subjective. There's got to be some objectivity to art. Like most, I would say most people, if they have aesthetic sensibility, which, as C.S. Lewis pointed out in the first chapter of Abolition of Man, Men Without Chests, needs to be educated. Like, we do need to educate ourselves in beauty. Like, it's the difference when Lewis is talking about Men Without Chests, and he's talking about Coleridge, and you're talking about the two people at the cataract, the waterfall, and the one looks at the waterfall and calls it sublime, and the other looks at the waterfall and calls it pretty. And Coleridge says the first guy got it right, the second one didn't. How can you say it's right? Isn't it? No, like, there is something objective And the term and the reaction of the first visitor to the waterfall is more accurate, at least, than that of the second. So we do be educated. Now that means like there is something that was done better in the scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi is killed by Darth Vader, as opposed to when Kim Jong-un or Qui-Jong-il or whatever is killed by Darth Maul. There just is, right? And you can't, if you have the same reaction to both, you may have to consider the fact you might be aesthetically undereducated.
I like that there's really just no substitute for time spent. Like money drives the way that stories are written. More recent Marvel movies are objectively worse than the first set because they're being more rushed. They're trying to recreate something that already existed before. It's not so much about the artistry of the thing itself. A lot of those attitudes can get kind of conflated with like snobbery, but there is a good version of that where you appreciate, like I liken it to, if you were going to try to describe what a certain political movement is doing, you're going to have a really hard time doing that if you don't know your history. So if somebody starts sharing, what I hear a lot is this kind of vague affinity for like socialism, right? Just the way that people talk about, oh, I can't believe you would ever have to pay that much for medical bills or whatever. Shouldn't we just have universal healthcare? Isn't it so ridiculous that we don't have it? The reason must be evil or whatever. But, you look at historical examples. If you know those well, then it's a much more complex conversation, and you can kind of appreciate the nuance of what somebody's trying to say. Same with movies, right? Like it's
well, it's with aesthetic sense. Aesthetic sense. Look, as Christians, we should be willing to admit that you take the doctrine of total depravity. Calvin didn't mean that we are as evil as we could be, but what he did mean is that every part of us, the totality of us, has been affected by sin. If we say that our moral integrity has been affected by sin, if we say that there are noetic effects of sin, intellectual effects, obviously there's going to be effects on our appreciation or ability to grasp beauty, which God is the beautiful in classically conceived. So why would we not also apply depravity to our aesthetic sensibilities? We are deficient in our approach to beauty.
Let's talk Kierkegaard then. I think that's a good kind of transition.
We know a lot about beauty.
Yeah. So this is kind of the last kind of key point you made in the article, at least on the aesthetics. Sort of it's the movie, that is, its inability to contribute to positive growth of the individual, to kind of feed, growth in the way that we should see it. But that kind of relies on, if you want to explain, we've touched on it a bit, sort of what Kierkegaard's like categories are there.
Yeah, and I want to be careful because, again, I'm no Kierkegaard scholar, and I had to run and grab, I think it was Fear and Trembling or Sickness Unto Death off my desk. Although we did just do a podcast with
a
real expert and on Kierkegaard, and that's what was in my mind, was something that Brent Lyons had said while I was doing that interview about the fantastic. So I may be stretching a little bit. If there are any Kierkegaard scholars who care to read that article, they can criticize me on this point if they like. But because he only talks about the fantastic in like 2 or 3 spots. So I might be stretching it a bit. But my idea was that obviously there's a place for the imagination. Kierkegaard talks about the imagination in spades. Obviously all our literary heroes like Lewis and Chesterton and T.S. Eliot talk about the imagination, and George MacDonald, his essay, The Fantastic Imagination, and it takes some imagination to conceive of worlds that aren't the actual world, but make them relevant to us. right? That's we imagine worlds like Middle Earth, like Narnia, that they're make up, but they're relevant. They're relevant to us in deep and meaningful ways. This is not Gunn's Superman is not one of those worlds, right? It's just a population. It's just populating the screen with, and then Aristotle, this again would be fall under the problem of plot. Things need to cohere. They need to hook together in some meaningful way. Again, this Godzilla-like figure, a monster that just pops up in the middle of the movie and rampages, so that again you can get the Justice Gang back in there and doing a bunch of special effects. The interdimensional imp that ruins a potentially good scene, and then I don't know, the cyborg woman with genetically altered blood who can turn into her hands into blades and whatever whatever the hell is going on there. Yeah. And there's just one after another. I think I listed like 20, but there was 20 more. Sort of just things thrown in this movie. And I understand that these are sort of like Easter eggs for the comic book guys. Oh, like that was in this one comic book. But make multiple films then, because what you're doing is, and this was the problem, by the way, with Spider-Man 3. This is where it failed. It was just throwing images, ideas, content, characters in there that had no relevance to the plot or the main characters' lives. They were just totally irrelevant. Eye candy, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's where Kierkegaard would say that leads us away from, that's a distraction in a sense. It leads us away from the things, the imagination, the acts of the imagination that can tell us something genuine and real about ourselves in lieu of this actual story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Let me read. I like that sort of begrudgingly giving some credit to Marx on the on the Easter eggs. So this is Marx weighing in on comic book movie Easter eggs, naturally. You said none of these Easter eggs adds to the present story or its characters. Instead, this panoply of images acts as an infinite loop of pop culture referring back on itself. A perpetual commodification of cultural products which empties any of them of real meaning. The one thing Marx warned about that he actually got right. So there's his
commodification. The cheapening of the things we create as we market them. They lose their existential significance, and they become cheap products. I mean, I've noticed this. There's so many. We both have little kids. My kids are older than yours, but I got 3, and so many of these kids movies these days, Minions or whatever, all they are is a self-reference of pop culture referring back to pop culture. That's it. How many pop culture songs can we get into the movie? How many references to some movie from 20 years ago can we get in there? And that's the whole thing. And that's the whole story. That's the whole point even. And I'm like, well, what's the point if we can't get out of this sort of cultural loop and point us to anything more transcendent than basically ourselves and what we made not even a long time, but just 20 years ago? There was a movie, by the way, that came out recently, just to cap that off, that broke that mold. And I was so pleased. And my kids have watched it like 10 times in the last couple of weeks, called Transformers 1. Is the new Transformers.
I've heard good things. Yeah.
They did not do that. There might have been references to the Transformers mythos, but there weren't these just pop culture references to other movies or video games or anything like this. It was an actual story. And they tried to develop the characters, and it's got some real pathos in it. It really does.
That's cool. Yeah. I think that, that is often a byproduct of, it could be a lot of things other than just an actual degradation of the like creative integrity of the person who's responsible for it. I think in particular when you're making something on the scale of a new Superman movie, and now I think from what I understand, my limited knowledge of the industry side is James Gunn was given more control than most are because of where he came in from, his experience doing Guardians of the Galaxy movies, of course. But there's I think an internal battle for a lot of directors, even actors, writers in that industry where they might actually have something of greater value that they're earnestly trying to push out there that gets cast aside in the name of oh, we don't want it to look too much like this old one, or it needs to make money in this market. So it actually so fascinating to me. Part of the conversation around almost every like big movie release like this is, what was changed so that it can make money in the Chinese market, or what was changed. Sometimes they get a different version, so that may not affect the product that we receive. But there's just so many of those considerations that have absolutely nothing to do with not even just artistic integrity, but like what you're describing, what Kierkegaard is describing, whether it's communicating something of real value, right? Because I've seen plenty of that in like I mentioned, I really love that first arc of the MCU movies, and they probably don't have nearly as much pathos as some more, some movies that most people would qualify more as like classical film or whatever, some of the best of the genre. But I remember lots of time spent in conversation, and what it does well is exploring that kind of pathos and the complexities of having those powers. I mean, even just look at like Bruce Banner's a great example. His arc in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is incredible. I mean, he deals with depression and there's complexities in the relationships that he has and the way that his powers affect him change over time. He is accidentally like the impetus for multiple, things going wrong. And the whole Civil War arc explores, sort of a division among superpowered people about how much accountability they should, behold themselves to. So there's a lot that can be done. And that was your point that this genre is not immune to good storytelling. It's just that this example is perhaps not the best. So
and I haven't seen all of the I'm not a huge comic book fan. So the superhero genre is one, when I'm kind of in the mood, I'll go. I would say the three that I've mentioned repeatedly are the ones that stand out as really good. Well, maybe four, because I'll put the first and the second Superman, Christopher Reeve's Superman movies out there, because I think the opening scene of the second one with the three criminals on trial, it's an interesting scene. The other thing about the original movies, they raised serious philosophical questions. This one did not. At the end of the original, right, Superman's got an actual dilemma, a moral dilemma he needs to deal with. Lois is dead. Because why? Lex Luthor, not through technology, but through his wits, outsmarted Superman. Can't catch both of the nuclear missiles going in opposite directions. Catch one, can't catch the other, right? Lois dies, right? But he's got this sort of prime directive from his divine parents not to get involved in the timeline of human history. So here's now a woman that he genuinely loves. We know he loves her. Not like, we don't know if Lois and Clark really love each other. In fact, I would even say in the Gunn film, it looks like they can just maybe get along in the bedroom. That's what it looks like.
They just describe it as
like maybe they get along in the bedroom.
Yeah.
It's not sexual. It's sexual. But in the original, like he's grieving, and Reeves, not the greatest actor in the world, but he pulls that off very well, right? Like the genuine sorrow at losing this woman that he's fallen in love with. And in the second movie, he gives up his divine powers to actually marry her, right? So he breaks the imperative. He does break the divine command, which we'll get to in the next episode. But he breaks it and he reverses the timeline, right? Now there's a loophole there because it doesn't show how he actually solves the problem of the two missiles. but 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 at least it really makes one consider what is a genuine moral dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah. There's,
The
yeah,
trolley
I,
problem for those who are familiar with the
yes. Oh,
literature.
absolutely. Yeah. And this, what's funny is there were probably several opportunities for that in this. I love the idea of the very clear Israel-Palestine parallel with the two fictional countries where, I mean, Lois even says at one point, he's saying, "Oh, I intervened because these people were going to die." And she says, "Well, even the country that's being invaded isn't all sunshine and roses, and the one that's invading is an ally of the United States. So are you going to go against the United States?" Like it seemed very clear, at least, that you could extrapolate Israel-Palestine from it. Now, I love the
I mean,
idea,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
of having a superhero that has to decide. And they did a bit of that in the first Iron Man, where once he has the suit, he's trying to decide, like, well, I could go over there in 10 minutes and solve this problem right now. And I mean, they go through trials with him. All of the Civil War arc is about the complexities of them acting independently of like governing nations. But that's
Yeah.
just thrown away and doesn't really get used in like an interesting way in this one.
Yeah, they could have done more there. I mean, I did not, to be honest, I didn't pick up on what a lot of people have called the woke agenda. So you're an alien, and yeah, we don't want aliens around here, and I think part of the reason I didn't pick up on that is that is a running theme in the comic book genre of what do we do with these superheroes or these alien? I mean, that's not new to this movie. That's always been
Yeah.
there, right?
No, that strikes me more as, like we said at the beginning, people kind of fishing for something.
Yeah,
Plus, I don't think that like any subject matter can be handled well. I think it's all well and good to talk about whatever, like race relations. It's more about whether you have a productive, insightful conversation about it that acknowledges the complexity of it versus. But I didn't really pick up on any of that in this.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I going back in, I could probably see it there, but again, because that's a long-standing, at least the part like Lex Luthor wanting to get rid of Superman because he's an alien, whatever, and he doesn't belong here. That to me is something like we've seen that for a while now in the comic book genre, and that's probably in the comic books and in the movies.
yeah.
So I
Well, they even said
too
it's
worried.
Superman is bad for business. I think that might even be said directly in the movie. And Luther is again. I'm more familiar with Marvel kind of history than DC, but I think
What
he's
would have
known to
been
be like
interesting,
a businessman.
yeah.
He's about the land
Well,
deals and everything. So
yeah. Well, he was more, yeah. Now, what would have been an interesting take, something that would have maybe gave some real, how do having these superheroes relieve us of even having to make morally difficult decisions?
yeah, yeah,
See, like, why doesn't that would be creative? That would take creativity, though, and it would take a little bit of like having maybe read some good books. Like if you have a Superman who can take care of all your problems, right? And maybe we'll get into the next article. Then what moral decisions do we have to make at all? Does it take away moral responsibility from us, right? Like, what if God or Jesus really did just do everything for us? There wasn't any participation in God's with God, any concursive act of the human will with the will of God, but God just really did just do everything for us. There was a constant miracle every time we were about to, as my old apologetics professor Clay John, every time I had the inclination to kill somebody, the knife that I pick up as I go to plunge it in this guy's heart just turns into a Fisher Price toy or something. So that every time, so like I don't have to change. It's just there, God always miracles it that nothing bad ever happens or something like that.
yeah,
That would be more
yeah.
interesting to pursue.
No, I think the
line of
best
thinking.
of that genre is the material that really gets into the weeds on how those like supernatural abilities like really get mixed up in complicated ways with with daily life and just with like the problem of evil. There's a lot of good examples of that, but yeah, well, so like you said, let's jump into the other one then. I mean, obviously there's not saying more about the movie than your article. There's not a whole lot to talk about just because there's not there are a lot of movies that say a lot of crazy stuff and kind of like push something prescriptively. I didn't really get the sense of that much at all in this. You know, the couple examples you mentioned are kind of the only ones that even get close to that. So I just preface this part of the conversation with that. There's some extrapolation that kind of has to happen to have a conversation on it. But first and foremost, like you said, sort of the most important, the most notable example of maybe theological implications being the conversation with Pa Kent. Once again, very short, like remarkably short for there being a conversation between, I mean, he's Pa Kent. Like this is the guy who's meant to have shaped Superman. Now, I will say as a caveat, we've had origin stories so many times that a lot of the time directors will circumvent that entirely because people don't want to see that. The newer trilogy of Spider-Man movies that Marvel made with Tom Holland. Yeah, it's funny actually. On this podcast, we're usually saying not the actor Tom Holland. We're talking about the
author.
Academic.
Yeah, now we are.
This time we're flipping it back. So they don't do the origin thing. They don't do the field trip and the spider bite and the finding the powers. They skip all that because everybody's seen that before or had seen it in relatively recent history. So they get some credit for that. I think it's sometimes you don't always need that. But yeah, let's say very brief conversation. You kind of kicked yours off with a quote from Chester Delagno on the movie, part of his review, I imagine, a part of a longer review. On the movie, which
Chester, Chester, who I go back and forth with on Facebook, and we kind of support each other's writing. I don't know him personally, but he had made a good point. Just asking sort of questions like, what's up with Pa Kent's sort of like, you go be you sort of speech, we'll love you no matter what. And the accompanying inversion, this revelation that Jor-El and Lara are evil. They are not benevolent parents, but they actually have sent I'm blanking on Kal-El. They've sent Kal-El to Earth to rule over it like a dictator, right? Like a malevolent dictator.
The secret harem that they keep joking about. Yeah.
So that inversion, I thought. Now, I heard later that this is actually the plot line in a TV show called Smallville.
Yeah, there's some precedent. So, yeah, they've done. I think they've done the full spectrum of moral code by this. And again, talking about universes being reset and TV shows versus comic runs. I mean, there's multiple versions, but
yeah, and and that's okay. That's fine in a sense if that's what Gunn wanted to draw from. That's not unlike Eggers drawing from F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu instead of the Bram Stoker source material for last year's Nosferatu, where Nosferatu are where the characters. It's not that Nosferatu is much different, but it's that the other characters are different, and the Christian theme is basically extracted out, and a sort of more pantheistic pagan theme is put in place. So Chester was asking these questions. It was about why they would do this, and sort of, I think, I don't have his article in front of me right now, but I think the questions he was putting is,
what I didn't track with was casting Kal-El's parents as dictators, which has no he says has no precedent in comics or movies. Like we've established, there's some. That's another conversation. But he also says he's not casting judgment on that, just stating the divergence. So he's not necessarily saying that it has to adhere or that it can't be a new idea. He says, I wonder why James Gunn, writer and director, would do that. And I realized the answer to my own question when I saw the scene of Superman talking to his adoptive father. Sitting shoulder to shoulder on the front porch, Pa Kent, portrayed as a simple farmer, explains that they, meaning Pa and Ma, didn't raise their son for some greater purpose. Okay, this could be construed as not wanting to impose on their son's free will, fair enough. But he continues to tell him, parents aren't for telling their children who they're supposed to be. Ma and Pa simply love him for being their son. Nothing wrong with sentimentality, but it's another quote that makes me think there's something else going on. Pa finishes, your choices, your actions, that's what makes you who you are. But isn't that just stating the obvious, which isn't worth mentioning given its platitudinous nature? I would like to point out that Pa is waxing sentimental, not inspirational. One other thought I had on that too was that he is saying that in direct response to Clark Kent expressing concern that he's not who he thought he was. Right. Probably thinking the issue that Pa Kent realizing that he's thinking too highly of who his parents are, and that's when he kicks off the conversation of saying, well, parents aren't for telling. But like you said, it's very vague. This is a very short conversation they have. It's one of very few poignant conversations in the movie.
I actually think it's actually the hinge of the movie. This conversation, at least from a philosophical point of view, given the revelation that Jor-El and Laura are evil, this is what we'd call the turn in the plot. This if anything is the moral crisis in the film that's presented. Is okay. I was totally fooled about who my parents were, what their original intent of my mission was, right? I've been doing things, at least in lieu of the actual intentions of my, again, quote unquote, divine parents. I've been doing everything wrong in their view. I've been down here being a benevolent helper, not a almighty dictator. Okay. So I think this was the most poignant scene in the film, and it's where we can draw the most, I think, theological conclusions from this scene of what is going on here. And I've talked about the paganization of some movies like Nosferatu. A recent movie that really embraces paganism quite explicitly is the new Michael B. Jordan movie, Sinners. So I think there's at least a mild kind of paganization going on here. Now, before I get into that, though, I got to say, there's at the human level of like there's a typical kind of very postmodern-y take on parenting here that I don't like as a father of three boys. And I pointed that out. I had to mention that in the article. Is like, if the idea is that go be what you want. It's this typical kind of like, go be whatever you want. We'll love you no matter what. Now, at one level, yes, there is a sense where one, as a parent, should not impose, as Chester pointed out, on the free will of children to sort of become their own independent selves, right? You don't want to live vicariously through your children, to put it shortly. Okay. But it seems to me like if one truly loved, this is where we've redefined love. This is the love is love kind of love. But if we took a serious, thick understanding of love, Christian love, then certainly the parent, the good parent, is concerned about what his son or daughter will become. Love would demand that you desire that your son does not become a criminal, does not become an immoral blackguard, to use C.S. Lewis's language in The Problem of Pain, chapter 4, I think. In fact, we want our kids to grow up to be good. good, virtuous children. Now that's in the moral realm, but even in the realm of functionality, as regards to what the children might do when they grow up. I mean, I think a loving parent still wants to have some say in what their child winds up doing. We don't want to be like, yeah, just, I don't know, figure it out yourself. Like, no, like, you're the parent. You're the one who has observed, cared for, thought about, watched the child grow and develop. You see their strengths, you see their weaknesses. Like, I know, like, I'm not going to try and tell my kids, yeah, you need to become an NBA basketball player because that's what, like, no,
Doctor,
like,
lawyer.
but there are certain things that if I am a good parent, attentive, that I might want to advise my children to go into. And I think that would be an act of love, right? So on both angles there, I think it's just a bad parent. Like Pa Kent's an idiot. Like I would not parent. I would not. They look like idiots. They're made out to be idiots too.
That's what was going to be my next point, is that regardless of what he even
says, they're not like the parents.
So passive.
Yeah. They're so passive.
Yeah,
exactly. Unlike the examples we get in the original movie. And I think I didn't see Man of Steel, but people said that the Kevin Costner character, Man of Steel, is much more inspirational kind of father figure.
There's more going on. Yeah. I do think that. Yeah. So what it's making me think of is, one, you're sort of pulling, like he's not actually taking, at least in the way it's presented in the film. I mean, you can assume that he was raised well by mom and pa because he's a virtuous guy. He's trying to figure out how to be responsible with his powers, right? So it's not like you can assume that was all the way through. But the way the movie's presented is that neither set of parents is actually having really any impact on him at all. And then where my mind goes is, well, he's not really growing on account of input from anybody else whatsoever, let alone parents. And so it's sort of an emphasis on, like you said, the only other real productive conversation in the movie, with the distraction of the alien in the background, is both of them just being so sure of who they are, and not, which is a byproduct of, we're losing any real sense of need to change. We're losing the weight of a Superman being just a kind of blundering fool in a place that he's not. I mean, he's familiar with it. He grows up on Earth, so it's not like he's confused by what life on Earth is like. But we kind of lose any need for anyone to like learn from each other as they face really unique circumstances. Like that's what makes some of those movies really intriguing, is we're seeing people struggle with something, and it really makes you wonder, like, how would I handle that situation? It's kind of an extreme example, and it's just an incredibly violent and crass show, but The Boys, which was produced by Amazon, it was a comic book series originally. And the central kind of idea of The Boys is that most of the well-known superheroes are corporate sponsored and awful human beings, like beyond selfish, evil. They're all, secretly partying and using their powers to take advantage of people. And the outlook for like the main characters of the film is just beyond bleak. Like it's just this awful existence. And as a show, it's reveling in the evil of it probably more than would allow me to recommend it to somebody. But what I like about it as a concept is that it really makes you wonder, what would you as a person do when this Superman figure, Homelander in that show, this Superman figure is doing whatever he wants. He's a total egomaniac. Nobody can tell him no because he's the Superman figure, right? And so it's these normal people trying to figure out what to do about that and like how to go about life. And you get this dichotomy of people who are saying, we just need to pretend like it's not happening and try to live our lives. And there's other people saying, no, we need to fight back. But fighting back means compromising on whatever values you have, because you have to take such extreme measures to take down somebody who has superpowers. Again, none of that real, kind of complexity in this. Yeah. And I mean, in that, and in those examples, people are just kind of laid bare in an interesting
Or
way.
again, here talk about complexity. What if there had been, there might have been, I can't remember, but there might have been some internal wrestling in Sweet's Superman over. Well, what I don't think so. What if, I mean, I didn't see, what I'm trying to say is I didn't see any maybe actual moment of temptation where he was like, maybe I should listen to my parents, my divine parents.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, it's like we already knew that he was going to go off and just reject their divine command to rule over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. His only real dilemma is just the fact that he found out they're not what he thought they were.
Yeah, it's an emotional dilemma. It's not a moral one though. It's just he knows morally there's no morally complex situation there for him. It's just a sentiment. Like, let's just point out, it's sentimental. He's got to get over some emotions, some disappointment, serious disappointment. But there's no like, maybe like not the best example because it doesn't ever feel to me like Luke is really tempted to go to the dark side, but you know, maybe we're like, you know, there's a real, like, at least a scene there where he's like sitting there like, well, these are my parents. This is who I am. Some kind of real, you know, like maybe this is, you know, or say maybe I could rule in a benevolent way, like almost like more like Frodo with the ring or something, right?
Yes.
Or like Gone with the Ring, like,
yeah. There's reason for, they've earned the resolve that they have. Essentially. Now, again, with a comic book movie, there is precedent.
Not Frodo with the ring, more like Aragorn or Isildur with the ring.
Yes, yeah,
you know,
100%.
Like they could actually do
example.
damage. Like,
yeah. Well, and we see real struggle with it. Like they one more than the other, but they really struggle with the temptation. And so they're probably riding on some kind of precedent there, which again maybe is a byproduct of not wanting to do the origin story again, but riding on the fact that people understand that, you know, Superman has had to get to the point where he's made up his mind about what he's going to do with his abilities. There was more of that, I think, with the Kevin Costner Pa Kent talking about, you know, you're going to have to decide whether you go public with this. So there's some acknowledgement there, and maybe they just didn't want to rehash it. But again, as the movie presents itself, is just kind of missing. Yeah, let's talk a little bit just to kind of close out the theological side. Revisit that sort of inversion of certainly an inversion of the classic Superman story. But I want to talk about the sort of Christology, gospel reflection of it, and just kind of what role that plays, because what I internally like, so we understand that, certainly as Christians especially, we understand that our creativity is one of the ways that we reflect a creator God, right? And one of my favorite things about all the wacky stuff in nature is that it just shows that God is creative. It doesn't have to have a practical purpose, at least not one that we understand and can describe. He's creative, and we understand that we are as well. And so certainly we're able to have like biblical backing for creating fiction, for telling stories that aren't just outright like the gospel again. Like not everything, we understand that not everything has to be a direct like gospel, like allegory, metaphor. And, but then it only goes so far, right? So it's more the question of this movie, and having this conversation just made me think, you know, how far can we stray from overt gospel until we start to lose like redemptive value, or at least even just some kind of like truth value in it. And this movie just kind of begs that question, because it's a valid concern that you make about this sort of inverting it, where you're saying, if Superman is the Christ figure, then his parents should sort of be benevolent. And if they're not, then you're sort of inverting that. But then, you know, we also understand that maybe that just pushes it closer into parallels with, you know, it's maybe that's more honest about fighting against sin nature or sins of the father. There's plenty of adopted children out there that spend their entire lives trying to work against the
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
nurtured evil.
Yeah.
So that's maybe like the most generous way to interpret the way that they handled that. But I'm curious your thoughts
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of people commented on the Substack were like, oh, well, Superman's more like Adam or even like Moses, because I guess the original Superman comic book was written by two Jewish fellows and they saw more of as a Moses. And I'm like, well, okay, but if he's a Moses figure, that's fine because that's it's a messianic figure. The typology is still there. Moses is the Messiah for Israel. And he's taking his divine commands from God, right? So, but I do think in the original movie, and given the powers that Superman has in the comic books, Superman is one of these characters in the comic books, like he is as close to invincible as it gets, right? As far as I know. I mean, again, I'm sure they've gone into other things, but when I was a kid, it was like, there's like a handful of superheroes that are like almost God, right? Like Superman, Silver Surfer, I don't know, a couple others, right? Okay. Where it's really like say like they got all these attributes, these godlike attributes. So, so Superman, and I just laid out like at least I think here are 5 or 6 points that are facts about both of the characters in the original movie and in the new movie. Superman is sent to Earth from beyond, right? He's got sort of a divine, or in this case, semi-divine nature, and he's also got a human persona. He takes on a human identity. He's good. He's morally good. His mission is basically to save human beings, right? And I think there are a couple other points that I made. Now, if you invert those who have sent him to Earth, if you invert their character and their commands, so what I say, so there is a sense in which Superman is a savior, a messianic figure, is what I was saying. Like if you just take those points, the metaphor breaks down clearly. He's got two parents, not one. He can be killed by kryptonite. He has romantic interests, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the analogy breaks down. We get that. But these features make him, as of the comic book characters out there, these make him as close to a Messiah figure, a Christus figure, as I think you're going to get. And in the original movie, that's the case, right? So if you invert then the more heavenly parents, if I can call Jor-El and Lara the heavenly parents, if you invert their character and their commands, then this has theological ramifications, right? Because the closest analogy to them would be basically God the Father, who sends the Son to save humanity. So now you have the problem of you have a malevolent father, who, because he's malevolent, the Son, if the Son is good, cannot follow the will of the Father. He must, in fact, reject the will of the Father and instead side with humanity. And this is much more like the pagan story of Prometheus than the Christian story of the gospel, where Prometheus defies the father god Zeus, the head of the gods, brings the salvific fire, the techne, to humanity and sides with humanity. And although this doesn't come out in Superman, in Gunn's version of Superman, Prometheus is then punished by Zeus, right? So I think this really does change what is at least a reasonably close analogy to the Christ story that is the original.
Yeah, and certainly if you are, embracing the fact that you're trying to tell virtuous story, you sort of intuitively want this to be a messianic figure, even if it's not explicitly Christian.
Yeah, doesn't have to
Then
be.
maybe that is more of the danger of deviating from it, is that if you're claiming to do that, you at least have to kind of acknowledge that, you know, you're distorting it in a way, and which makes it tricky. It's hard to decide, you know, how much can that be distorted until we are actively working against like a positive messianic metaphor or whatever, however you want to categorize it. That's the part that was kind of interesting to me, is, you know, what value is lost, and at what point does this tip over into, you know, actively hurting the message of the gospel in a sense, right?
Well, and this one of the things, like, it doesn't have to be a gospel movie. It can be a more pagan myth. That's fine. But that's when my previous critique of the aesthetics then is just going to come back into play, because at least make it a good pagan example of the Prometheus myth, you know. But I just wanted to point that out, because Christians might think, if you're trying to see this, as we talked about at the beginning, as a Christian film or with Christian theme, I think it is far afield from a Christian theme, and in fact, it's a non-Christian theme.
Well, one of the points you made early on in the article too is that some of that is in response to a lot of, you know, kind of glowing reviews from, you know, other kind of Christian, not necessarily scholars, but just
Tyler McNabb, who's, as far as I know, is still on the board of EPS. So Tyler, if you see this, I was a little taken aback by your praise of the film.
Yeah, there you go. Which is good. That's why we have that conversation, because you know, I think you can find. Actually, I'd be really curious to talk to Sean McDowell in particular, as somebody who is a fan of those movies, who maybe understands that background better, to hear what he thinks. I'm sure he has a review out there somewhere, some kind of YouTube video.
He probably already does. He probably had a review out 10 minutes after the movie released.
Yeah, well, he's got a pretty good. I don't remember exactly what the list is, but he's got a pretty good kind of structured criteria for analyzing media from a Christian worldview that I think is helpful. Yeah. Let me throw one more thing out there that I thought was just interesting, not necessarily a theological question, but you know, we've talked about a lot of the reasons why this movie kind of ends up without a whole lot of pathos, character depth, time spent in the complexities of the human element or whatever. I'm intrigued by the idea of junk food media, sort of the term that I got. My wife, who was raised as an avid reader, was taught this idea of, you know, let's understand that some books are of lesser value, lesser redemptive value, certainly, but just lesser quality even. And we understand those as junk food books. Not to say that we never read them, but to say that we just need to understand their place in like the hierarchy, right? So this movie, in my mind, would sort of qualify as what you could call like a junk food movie, which again is not to say it's bad. I love Doritos. I shouldn't be eating them, but I'm definitely going to from time to time. It's moderation, right? Like, we understand that those things aren't objectively hurtful. There's a place for them. But then, you know, theologically, ethically, I'm curious what you think about that, just as a category for media in general. Like, what role does that serve, or is there even any kind of biblical basis for, you know, appreciating things in that sense
that are sort of junk foodish and that, you know,
like
kind of things?
What do we do with that?
I don't think so. I might be a little, come off as a little harsh and judgmental, but I take a more Platonic, and I mean Platonic view of art. It has to have pedagogical value. Otherwise, I think art does convey knowledge. I think it conveys moral knowledge. At least good art does. And I do not see this sort of postmodern idea of l'art pour l'art, or art for art's sake. I think art should be mimetic. It should be represent It should be, as Aristotle said, like create a world that relates to our world in such a way as that it gives, it has some kind of value for us pedagogically and mainly morally, in our moral compass. So I've never understood like the sort of, oh, it's just entertainment. It's just to veg out and turn your brain off. I've never understood that. I don't think it's healthy for us. I don't see any point to that. Just sort of like to have mindless distraction to me is, I think it's not good. It's unhealthy. And I don't think it's conducive to the Christian life. I did have a talk I gave at Biola not too long ago on paganism. I had some art students in there, film students. We talked about this, so yeah, so that's where I would land on that. I think I don't, and that's not the, but because there are, there are, at the same time, I said there might be movies that are less good that I still enjoy. Right. I mean, like there is some subjectivity here. I mean, it's like Taken, the movie Taken, like Liam Neeson. Like, it's not high art. It's not a great movie, but I do like it. Like, I do enjoy it. Right.
Kierkegaard is saying that the start of the journey is the aesthetic. So there's it is part of it. And maybe to your point, there's oftentimes kind of like junk media, not just media, but just for this example, is sort of equated with rest. Like when you say, this is what I do to veg out or whatever, we probably not. And also when I say, we understand that there's a place for these things, that's not a biblical argument. I think you're right. I think we aren't really like given the space to say, I can cut these corners in the name of rest, in the name of rest would probably be the best thing, because like that's usually where those things come up.
You do need some movies that, again, they can't be bad movies, but you could have more movies that are less, like where like this is not like great art, but at the same time it's good enough. So there might be a category for good enough. Like Taken is good enough. If you're just like, obviously the moral compass, right? The good guy wins, the bad guys get what they deserve. So like that's all fine. And there are plenty of movies that are basically are like Taken, but maybe of a higher quality. I'm trying to think of one I can't think of one right now, but so so look, because I probably would say that too about. I would say that too about Spider-Man 1 or 2. Spider-Man 1 or 2, and I'm talking, again, Tobey Maguire. I don't know if I'd classify, those are not classic movies. They're not high, but but they are good movies.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I do think that
are they junk food? Yeah. They're really good junk food.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
I
think one thing that's probably important to mention too is, take Superman, right, the new one. If you set aside the fact that it is like purporting to have valuable storytelling, right? Just leave that aside. There are creative endeavors being demonstrated. So I had this thought last night after I walked out of the movie. I was like, okay, the like CGI, the people that put those things together to turn something supernatural into like to make that look realistic, that's an incredible skill set. Now, so then maybe this movie as a demonstration of human creativity with technology is great. That's one shot of him flying that looks like it could be real could have been somebody's like blood, sweat, and tears kind of pride and joy creative output, right? But this is being put out as a movie, which or as drama, as tragedy, like we said before, and so it's more a question of what it's claiming to do and what it's achieving versus what's behind it. But I thought that'd be worth mentioning, even just in like action. Like if you see something like Taken, the entertainment value is fight choreography, which again is its own, creative endeavor in a sense. That's why we enjoy it. So maybe we're sort of pulling value from stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's a movie. This could be a stage production that is all about demonstrating fist fighting, boxing, or karate or sword fighting, right? Like the movies that do that well. It's in its sense like you're just observing another creative expression, but not necessarily the movie itself.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, and I'll have to wrap it up here in a second, but it's interesting about fight choreography because, well, a lot of my favorite movies have good fight choreography, like the Jason Bourne films and stuff. Of course, Paul Greengrass is a good director. But that's interesting because, I mean, that's certainly maybe, I don't know what, I'm not a film critic, so I don't know if that falls under cinematography. It's interesting though, because there's a difference, I mean, between like fight choreography like that in Taken or the Jason Bourne movies and the fight choreography between Superman and the helmet of Bolivia or whatever, it's like the hammer. It's like in Taken and those are more, they relate because it's like, well, look, this is real. Or it's or especially the Bourne movies, they get pretty realistic. They try and get realistic, and it's not that you can't have cool sci-fi fight movies, fight choreographies, but at some point these sci-fi choreography, it's like I never liked the Matrix films. Like the Matrix films for me I thought they were terrible. But again, I don't know. I want to leave some room for subjectivity there, but like those didn't do it for me. I don't know, because there was more special. Obviously, those were special effects generated fight choreographies, as opposed to the other ones which were not.
And for the Matrix, in hindsight, you're not going to find any human element to that sequence, but there's something about in that era, the person that pulled that off technologically was demonstrating some kind of intellectual prowess or creative prowess, right? But that's happening. That's happening behind the scenes. So appreciating some of those from like a technical perspective. Sure. Yeah. I will say just last thing I wanted to know from it. I love the army of crazy monkeys sending out all the tweets, negative tweets about him when they go through the prison realm. All the negative things that are being said about him. Yeah, I thought that was a good
being written by these space monkeys in space.
Sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's like if you had one or maybe two elements like that in the movie, maybe that would work. But when every scene is some crazy like thing, it's like it's just.
I only remember that because I wrote it down.
It's not adding to the story.
Yeah,
but that like you can have an Easter egg or two. Yeah, that's fine, but like not every scene, right?
We don't need to be proving Marx's point by including so many. Any other thoughts, just in general, especially as it relates to kind of application? We talk about kind of equipping the church. I mean, it may just be that there's not much to say about it because it's so shallow, but.
I mean, just again, the higher order, concern here is. Are we losing our ability to appreciate beauty? And are our aesthetic sensibilities degrading? I think many people have argued, of course, yes, they are. It's not even really a controversial question. It's a pretty, I think a lot of people just say, yeah, obviously. So, and that's just, I think as Christians, that's something to be aware of. I think we need to be aware of that because we're supposed to be oriented towards that which is actually beautiful. And that might take some training, I don't want to settle for muddy water, not Muddy Waters, the blues singer, who was a generally great artist, by the way, but the muddy waters of bad movie making.
Yeah. That's good. I like it. Well, if you've seen the movie, let us know in the comments what you thought. Be sure to check out the show notes or the video description for those two articles that we talked about if you'd like a deeper dive after listening to this episode. But Anthony, thank you for taking the time to engage on this and helping us think through some important cultural moments like this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. Please take a moment to leave a review on your podcast app of choice. If this episode made you think of someone you know, please share it with them. If you want to get in touch with the Kirkwood Center, you can call or text us at 909-493-7799 or send us an email at contact@kirkwoodcenter.org. You can also visit our website at kirkwoodcenter.org. If you want to join the theology and ethics conversation and see more content, you can find the Kirkwood Center on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube and Substack. Until next week, my name is Anthony Costello. Thank you for listening to the Kirkwood Center podcast, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until then, God bless.